Full text of Zhang Ailing's Red Roses and White Roses P to Section 3. Another 2 weeks passed like this, and the weather suddenly became warm. He went out without a coat. Later, it rained a little bit, and he felt chilly again. He hurried back during lunch to get his coat, which was hanging in the hall, on the cloth hanger, but can't see it. After searching for a long time, he became anxious. Seeing that the door to the sitting room was ajar, he opened the door and went in. He saw his coat hooked on the frame of an oil painting on the wall, and Jiarui sat on the sofa, under the painting. Go up and quietly light a cigarette and smoke. Zhen Bao was taken aback, quickly backed out of the door, stepped aside, and couldn't help but look inside again. It turned out that Jiarui was not smoking. There was an ashtray on the armrest of the sofa. She polished the match, lit a piece of remaining cigarette, and watched it burn. It slowly burned her fingers and burned her hands. Throw it away, bring your hand to your mouth and blow on it, as if you were satisfied. He recognized the cloison ashtray as the one in his room. Zhen Bao slipped out like a thief, feeling just panicked. At first I was confused, but after I figured it out, I was still confused. It wasn't enough for someone like Jiarui to sit beside his coat so infatuatedly, letting the smell of cigarettes on the clothes envelop her, so she simply lit up the remaining cigarettes he smoked. What a child, spoiled and spoiled. You get whatever you want. So when you meet someone who is slightly resistant, you feel that he is worth missing. The mind of a baby and the beauty of a mature woman are the most alluring combination. Now Zhen Bao was completely conquered. He still had dinner outside and invited a few friends to a restaurant, but everyone in the room became increasingly dull and disgusting. Zhen Bao became impatient and finally stayed up until the end of the party. He couldn't help but jump on the bus and go back to his apartment, where Jiarui played the piano and played the most popular song Shadow Waltz at that time. Zhen Bao put his hands in his pockets and walked back and forth on the balcony. A lamp was placed on the piano, illuminating her face. He had never seen her face so solemn. Zhen Bao hummed the song along with the piano, but she seemed not to hear him, so he just continued playing and changed to another song. He didn't have the guts to sing along. He stood at the glass door and looked at her for a long time, tears welling up in his eyes. Because he and she were together after all. To people with bodies and hearts, he half expected her to see his tears, but she only played her piano. Zhen Bao became troubled and came closer and helped her lift the music score, deliberately disturbing her, but she ignored her. She didn't follow the music at all. The tune was she knew it by heart, and it flowed out from her hands. Zhen Bao suddenly felt angry and scared, as if he had nothing to do with her. He sat next to her on the piano bench, hugged her with his arms, and turned her round. The sound of the piano suddenly stopped, and she skillfully turned her face to one side. Skillfully, they kissed. Zhen Bao pressed her hard against the piano keys, making a series of chaotic thunders. Isn't this at least a little different from the kisses given to her by others? Jiarui's bed was too exquisite. Zhen Bao couldn't get used to sleeping on such a thick mattress. He still felt bedsick when he woke up early. When he was combing his hair, he found a clipped nail in his hair, a little red crescent moon. The long nails scratched him. When he fell asleep yesterday, he saw her sitting on the bedside cutting her nails. I forgot to check if there was a moon last night. It should be a red crescent. From then on, he would come back from work every day and sit on the upper floor of a double-decker bus. The front of the bus faced the setting sun, and the glass was full of light. The bus roared towards the sun, towards his happiness. His shameless happiness. How come it's not shameless? This woman eats other people's food, lives in other people's houses, and bears other people's surnames. But Zhen Bao was happier because he felt that he shouldn't be. He himself considered it depraved. The object that fell from a height was many times heavier than himself. The astonishing weight collided with Jiarui, knocking her unconscious. She said, "I really fell in love with you." When she said this, she still had a bit of a mocking tone. "Do you know? Every day I sit here waiting for you to come back, listening to the elevator slowly drive up, pass our floor, and keep going up. I feel like I have lifted my heart up and put it down, can't get down. Sometimes, it stops before reaching this floor, and I feel like I've lost my breath in the middle. Zhen Bao smiled and said, "You still have an elevator in your heart, which shows that your heart is still an apartment house." Jia Rui smiled faintly, walked to the window with her hands behind her back, and looked out. After a while, Fang said, "The house you want has been built." Zhen Bao didn't understand at first, but after he understood, I was stunned for a while. He had never been a person who was good at writing. This time he made an exception. He picked up a pen on the desk and actually wrote a line, "My heart is full of joy." In fact, it can't be said that he likes it. The joy of many chirping flesh suddenly quieted down. All that remains is a desolate tranquility, a contentment that is almost devoid of emotion. When they hugged him again, Jia Rui hugged him tightly, feeling ashamed again and said, "Isn't it the same when there is no love? If it can be like this without love, you must look down on me." She put the two he tightened his arms and asked, "Do you think it's a little different?" "Is it a little different?" Zhen Bao said, "Of course it's different." But he really couldn't tell the difference. In the past, Jia Rui was a very good lover. This kind of love is the first time in Jia Rui's life. She herself didn't know why she fell in love with Zhen Bao alone. She often stared at him with tenderness and slight mockery in her eyes, mocking him as well as herself. Of course, he is a man of merit, a first-rate textile engineer. He has a special demeanor in the office, as if he is always too busy to look up. The foreign boss shouted repeatedly, "Tong, Tong, where is Tong?" He pushed back the lock of hair hanging from his forehead. His eyes were shining behind his glasses, and even the edges of the lenses were shaking. "Streamer, he likes summer. Even if it is not summer, he will be so busy that he is sweating profusely. The wrinkles on his suit, the bends of his elbows and legs, are like smile lines." Many of his Chinese colleagues scolded him for being extremely poor. He told Jia Rui how he was capable, and Jia Rui also praised him, rubbed his hair with her hands, and said, "Oh, well, my kid is very good at doing things. But this is what you should know. If you don't know this, then are you okay? You are not very smart among others. I love you. Do you understand? I love you." He showed off in front of her, and she showed off in front of him. Her one skill is playing tricks on men. Like the somersaulting clown who somersaulted in front of the Madonna, she dedicated this to his love with the same piety. When her challenge elicited an appropriate response from the men, she looked at Zhen Bao with a modest smile, as if to say, "This is what I should know. If you don't know this, what's the point?" She used to be a Timison. Since that day she stopped being angry, but she went to tease him again. Zhen Bao understood her thoughts very well. Even though he found it boring, he tolerated it because it was childish. It was like fighting with a group of people. Living with Xiang Long's growing children is really a nuisance. Sometimes she talks about when her husband will come back. When he mentioned this, a gloomy smile appeared on Zhen Bao's face. His eyebrows and eyes drooped, and his whole face drooped like rags on a mop. This love was totally inappropriate. He repeatedly used this sinful nature to stimulate himself, making him love even more fiercely. Jia Rui didn't understand his psychology, and she felt happy when she saw him in pain, because in the past, although some people threatened to commit suicide for her when she was studying in England, she would wake up early in the morning without having time to wash her face, so she would rush out to see him with her lips painted red. Boyfriends, they also used to say, "I stayed up all night and walked around under your window all night long." That doesn't count after all. It is a rare thing to really make a man suffer for her. One day she said, "I was just thinking about how to tell him when he comes back," as if she had already decided to tell Shihong everything, divorce him and marry Zhen Bao. Zhen Bao didn't dare to intervene afterwards. He felt that just maintaining that gloomy smile was not enough, so he had to say, "I don't think this is reckless. I'll go find a lawyer friend first and ask him clearly. You know, if you don't do it well, you can suffer a lot." With a businessman's intuition, he felt that just mentioning the word lawyer had already involved him to a deep level. Jia Rui didn't notice his hesitation. She is very confident and thinks that as long as her problems are solved, others will have no problems. Jia Rui often called his office without any scruples, which also annoyed him. That day she called again and said, "Let's go somewhere to play together later." Zhen Bao asked why he was so happy, and Jia Rui said, "Don't you like me wearing decent Chinese clothes? I did it today. I want to wear it and go out." Zhen Bao asked, "Would you like to go to the movies?" At this time, he and several colleagues bought a car and drove it themselves. Jia Rui always took their cars and planned to go with them. He learned to drive it and threatened, "When I learn how to drive it, I will buy one too." "Did you ask Shi Hong to buy one?" After hearing this sentence, Zhen Bao stopped in his heart and could not digest it. Now he suggested watching a movie, but Jia Rui seemed to think it was not enough fun. She said first, "Okay." Then she said, "As soon as there is a car, go." Zhen Bao said with a smile, "What do you want your feet for?" Jia Rui said with a smile, "I'm chasing you." Then, there was a burst of excitement in the office. I was so busy that I had to hang up the phone hastily. It happened that a colleague also needed a car that day. Zhen Bao had always been the most sacrificial spirit, especially when it came to entertainment. The car dropped him off at the corner of the road. Jia Rui saw him standing at the window upstairs to buy a night newspaper. She didn't know if he was watching a movie advertisement. She rushed out to meet him on the street at the door and said, 5 o'clock. "It's such an important moment that it's too late without a car. Don't go." Zhen Bao looked at her and said with a smile, "Then why don't we go somewhere else, dressed up so beautifully?" Jia Rui hooked his arm. He smiled and said, "Wouldn't it be nice to just walk on the road?" Along the way, he asked thoughtfully whether he wanted to go here or there. Passing by a Western tea shop with music, after she refused to go in, he just said, "I have been very poor these past 2 days." Jia Rui laughed and said, "Oh, I know you were poor first, so I won't let you go." Just as he was talking, he met an old foreign lady from Zhenbao Suzy. When Zhenbao was studying, her family often asked her to send him money and bring him things. Mrs. Ash is an Englishman, married to a bastard, so she pays attention to everything and is very British. She is tall and camel-shaped, and she wears a rather elegant floral gauze. But it is cut so that one piece hangs on the other, a bit like an old beggar. The small eggshell navy blue felt hat has a pair of swallow's wings and a bead-headed hat pin. There is a circle of gray curly hair under the hat, which looks very much like a wig, and the eyes are like light blue porcelain fake eyes. She blew her breath like a orchid and spoke softly in English. Zhen Bao shook hands with her and asked, "Are you still living there?" Mrs. Ash said, "Originally, we were going home this summer. I'm going there. My husband really can't leave. Going to the UK is going home," even though her husband was born in China and is already the 3rd generation in China, and her last relative in the UK also has passed away. Zhen Bao introduced Jia Rui to her and said, "This is Mrs. Wang Shi Hong. She used to live in Edinburgh. Mrs. Wang has also been in London for many years. Now I live with them." Mrs. Ash also stood with her daughter. Zhen Bao was the most knowledgeable about mongrel girls. Miss Ash pursed her red lips and kept quiet. On her pointed white peach face, a pair of deep yellow eyes peered at everything. Women have not yet received their share of the family fortune, their share of sorrows, burdens, and joys, and they often have a look of attentiveness and waiting. Although Miss Ash is not very old, she is not like some women who are eager to return home. However, as a working woman in the city, she is often nervous. She has 2 large swellings under her eye sockets and is very haggard. The great defense of ethical education, both at home and abroad, was originally designed for women. It makes beautiful women more difficult to obtain and more valuable. It also protects unattractive women so that they will not face failure everywhere. Today's women don't have this kind of protection, especially bastard girls whose status is uncertain. The weariness and suspicion on Miss Ash's face were particularly sharp because of this. Jia Rui could tell at a glance that the mother and daughter would only be members of the lower middle class in England if they went home. Because she was Zhen Bao's friend, she deliberately wanted to give them a good impression. At the same time, she somehow always felt that she had conformed in front of women. Now that she was a wife, she should appear dignified and wealthy. Zhen Bao had never seen her smiling so reservedly, like a kind of movie star, motionless like a sapphire, only letting the dreamy light cause fluctuations of light and shadow deep in the gem. She was wearing a dark purple and blue georgette Chang faintly revealing a cold golden chicken heart hanging on her chest. As if she had no other heart besides that. Zhen Bao looked at her, feeling extremely proud on the one hand, but also a little doubtful on the other. As long as there was a man here, she would definitely act differently. Mrs. Ash greeted Mrs. Tong and Zhen Bao said, "My mother is in good health, and she still takes care of the whole family." He turned to Jiarui and smiled. "My mother often cooks. And she cooks very well. I always say that mothers like us are so rare, because after so many years of hard work, every time he praised his widowed mother, he could not help but grit his teeth. Although he smiled, his heart turned into a big stone, hardly weigh your mind." Mrs. Ash asked about his brothers and sisters again, and Zhen Bao said, "Du Bao, this kid is doing well. Now he has entered a vocational school, and in the future he can be sent by our factory to study abroad in the UK." Even the two younger sisters praised it. They're like golden boys and girls. Mrs. Ash smiled and said, "That's good for you too. I've always said, your mother is really proud to have you." Zhen Bao was modest for a while, so he also asked Mr. Ash about his family's career status. Mrs. Ash saw a newspaper rolled up in his hand and asked if there was any news tonight. Zhen Bao handed it to her to look at. She had presbyopia, so she held it from a distance and couldn't see clearly even at the length of her arm. He asked Miss Ash to hold it for her to see. Zhen Bao said, "I was planning to invite Mrs. Wang to watch a movie. There are no good movies." His attitude toward Jiarui in front of others was a bit stiff, saying that he was just a friend of her family, but Miss Ash was quiet. The quietly watching eyes made him feel that he was trying to cover up. So he came to Jiarui familiarly and asked, "Please make up for it next time, huh?" He looked at her with both eyes, then smiled, and then again regretful, as if speaking to vigorously cause spittle to splash on people's faces. He always felt like Miss Ash was watching. She was a young man with nothing, not even a name, but she was waiting for a whole world to come. Moreover, a big shadow had fallen on her face, and she had no other expression. Like Jiarui, although she is young, she already has many things, but they don't count. She seems a little confused, like a child picking many violets one by one, tying them into a handful, and then throwing them away. As for Zhen Bao, what little safety he had and his future were all created by himself. How could he be willing to let it slip away so easily? Young Master Kuo and Miss Ku's safety can be ignored because it is inherited. This is not easy for her. The same for people were walking slowly on the street. Mrs. Ash seemed to be living and working peacefully in a room with papered walls. But the big world of the three young people was full of dangers, and they were dancing and pounding underground. It's not dark yet, and the neon lights are already on. They look very fake in the sky, like the jewelry worn by an actor. Passing by a shop that sells lights, there are countless lights under the neon lights, all bright. In the iron grill of the restaurant, the female clerk bent over to pick up bread, and her cheeks, rouged and yellowed, seemed edible. Is this also the case in the eyes of the elderly? As Zhen Bao walked beside the old woman, he couldn't help but feel that youth does not last long. Pedestrians are instructed to cross the street here. A row of nails has been nailed into the middle of the road. The shiny round nails are slightly indented on all sides, making the asphalt road look dark and soft and elastic underfoot. Zhen Bao walked freely, and he didn't know whether it was because of the elasticity of the road or because of the elasticity of his own steps. Mrs. Ash saw the fabric on Jiarui's body and agreed, and said, "Last time I saw a piece like this at Huiluo Company, but Dolly didn't buy it because it was too dark. I even wanted to buy it myself. Then I thought, there are very few opportunities to wear clothes like this these days." She herself didn't think there was anything tragic about these words, but the other people were silent for a while and couldn't answer anything. Then Zhen Bao asked, "Is Mr. Ash still very busy?" Mrs. Ash said, "Yes, otherwise he will have to go home this summer and he really can't leave." Zhen Bao said, "Where? One Sunday I have a car, and I will pick you up to Jiangwan to eat the Chinese dim sum made by my mother." Mrs. Ash smiled and said, "That's great. My husband really dotes on Chinese things." Listening to her tone of voice as a wealthy guest from afar, I would never have guessed that her husband is half Chinese. After breaking up with Mrs. Ash and her daughter, Zhen Bao told Jiarui as if to explain, "This old lady is really very nice." Jiarui looked at him and smiled. "I think you are a very nice person." Zhen Baoshi smiled and said, "Ha? What? Why am I so good?" The question came to her face. Jiarui smiled and said, "Don't be angry. You are such a good person. As soon as a woman meets you, she wants to be your matchmaker, but she doesn't want to keep you for herself." Zhen Bao said with a smile, "Oh, you don't like good people," Jiarui said. "Usually women like good people, just because they think people like him can be deceived." Zhen Bao said, "Hey, are you deliberately trying to deceive me?" Jiarui paused. After a pause, he glanced at him and said with a smile, "This time, the bad woman was fooled." Zhen Bao simply couldn't bear the glance and the gentle words at that time. However, that night, sleeping in her bed, he thought of Mrs. Ash he met on the road. How he was studying in Edinburgh, how his family sent money in packages for him, and now was the time to repay his mother. He wants to move forward and upward consistently. First, improve your professional status. After gaining status, he will do something beneficial to society, such as setting up an engineering school for poor children, or building a model cloth factory in his hometown of Jingwan. How exactly he will do it is still a bit unclear, but it is already unclear. Feeling the warmth of the outside world, not only his mother, but his old mother everywhere in the world, with tears in her eyes, only saw him alone when she opened her eyes. Jiarui cuddled up against him in her deep sleep, and her whizzing breath, amplified under his ears, suddenly became something foreign. He got up, sat on the edge of the bed, lit a cigarette and smoked it in the dark. He thought she didn't know, but in fact she had already woken up. After a long time, she reached out to touch his hand and said softly, "Don't worry. I will be fine." She held his hand on her arm. Her words made him cry, but the tears were still a foreign thing. Zhen Bao didn't answer, but just touched the place where it was familiar. It was almost dawn, and the city was filled with the crow of roosters. The next day, when talking about her husband's return date, she said with certainty, "He will be back within these 2 days." Zhen Bao asked her how she knew, and then she said that she had written an airmail letter. "Go and tell Shihong everything and ask him to give her freedom." Zhen Bao screamed in his throat and immediately ran out to the street. He looked back at Chui Wei's apartment. The gray ochre streamlined large house looked like an unimaginably big train. It was roaring towards him, covering up the sun and the moon. Things had reached an irreversible stage. He always thought that he was measured and knew when enough was enough, but the matter took care of itself and moved on. Debate with her, it was useless. The trouble was, when he was with her, there was no need to argue. Everything was very clear. They loved each other and should continue to love each other. Without her, he had no chance to think of all the ideas. Just like now, he suspected that he had become a fool and fell into a trap. She loved him, but she deliberately put a wet shirt on his head, saying she was divorcing her husband because of him. If society does not agree, it will ruin his future. He walked randomly on the road and walked a lot. He went to a small hotel to drink and ordered 2 dishes. When he came out, he felt a stomachache. I called a rickshaw and planned to go to Dubao's boarding house. However, in the car, my stomach seemed to hurt even more. As soon as Zhen Bao's self-control was gone, he couldn't bear even the slightest pain on his body. He panicked, fearing it was cholera, and ordered the driver to take him to a nearby hospital. After he was hospitalized, he informed his mother, who came to see him that day, and bought lotus root powder and grape juice for him the next day. Jiarui is here too. His mother was a little suspicious that Jiarui had something to do with him, so she deliberately persuaded him in front of Jiarui. "It's only a small thing if you eat badly. You are such a grown-up man, and you don't know how to take care of yourself, so I didn't sleep all night. I'm so worried. I'm looking after you. How can I take care of so many? Let you go, but don't worry. If you marry a wife, I won't care. Mrs. Wang, please help me persuade him. He can listen to what his friends say, but he won't. My words, alas." It has been so easy for you to make progress in your studies until now. Don't think that now that you are here, you can do whatever you want. The more people think highly of you, the more you have to work hard. Mrs. Wang, please advise him. Jiarui pretended not to understand Chinese and just smiled. When Zhen Bao listened to his mother's words, they were actually similar to what he thought in his own heart. But when his mother spoke them, for some reason, they insulted his logic first. He felt ashamed and thought of a way to send his mother away. He and Jiarui were left alone. Jiarui walked to his bed, holding onto the iron railing. Her whole body posture was one of painful questioning. Zhen Bao turned over irritably. He couldn't explain it at the moment and couldn't get rid of his mother's logic. The sun hit his pillow, and then there was a sudden coolness. Jiarui went to close the curtains. She didn't leave. She stayed here to do the job of looking after the housewife, passing tea, water, and drowning basins. Her hands were equally cold when the porcelain basin touched her body. Sometimes he glanced this way by chance, and she took the opportunity to speak, saying, "Don't be afraid." She said he was afraid because he was most afraid of hearing. His expression suddenly changed, and she stopped. After a while, she said again, "I have changed everything." He turned around again and became uneasy, making her unable to continue. She said again, "I will never hurt you," and then said, "You can't live without me." Zhen Bao. The words that were left unfinished several times hung in the air like many pendulums, ticking at different speeds. Shake. The songs have their own theories. If you continue to deduce them, they will reach their climax and a bell will ring at different times. Zhen Bao felt that the whole room was filled with her voice, even though she was silent for a long time. When it got dark, before the lights were on in the room, she leaned on him and cried loudly. She has strength even in humiliation. He felt the firmness of her arms through the blanket and sheets, but he doesn't want power. He has the power himself. She hugged his thighs and cried. Her hair, permed extremely fluffy, was steaming like a pot of fire. Like a child with an injustice, he is crying and cannot get off the stage. He doesn't know how to stop. His voice is hoarse, but he has to continue. He gradually forgets why he was crying in the first place. Zhen Bao was the same, struggling to say no, don't do this, it won't work. He concentrated on overcoming the rising desires, and kept saying no, completely forgetting why he wanted to do it in the first place. Rejected. Finally, he found the right words. He bent his knees hard, trying to get her to stand up, and said, "Jiarui, if you love me, you have to think about me. I can't make my mother sad. She has the same view. We are different, but we cannot ignore her. She only relies on me. The society will never forgive me. She hung as my friend after all. Our love can only be the love of friends. It has always been the case before. My fault. I'm sorry for you. But now, it's your fault to write to him without telling me. Jiarui, what do you think? When he comes, you will say that you are joking with him." Yes. Just to coax him to come back early. He would believe it, if he wanted to believe it. Jiarui raised her red and swollen face and looked at him intently. In a flash, she stood up straight, as if she was surprised how she got to this point just now. She found her purse, took out a small mirror, turned her head to look round, brushed her hair back twice, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, blew her nose, and left without even looking at him. Zhen Bao didn't sleep well all night, so he caught up on his sleep in the morning. In the haze, someone seemed to be lying on him crying again. At first, he thought it was a nightmare, but later he found out that it was Jiarui. And she was here again. She had been crying for a long time. The warmth of this woman's body and mind covered him like a soft satin-covered eiderdown quilt. He was sweating leisurely, feeling a kind of emotional luxury. When he was completely awake, Jiarui left without saying a word, and neither did he. Later he heard that she had agreed to divorce Wang Shihong, which seemed to be something far away from him. His mother cried to him several times and asked him to get married. After delaying for some time, he finally agreed. So his mother asked someone to introduce him to him. When he saw Miss Meng Yanli, Zhen Bao said to himself, "That's her." When we first met, she was standing by the glass door in someone else's living room. wearing a silk shirt with orange and red stripes on a gray ground, but the first impression she gave was that it was generally white. She has a slender figure, straight down, with only a few twists and turns at the tips of her small breasts and her protruding hip bones. The wind blew in my face, and my clothes flew backwards, making me look even thinner. The face is broad, soft and beautiful, but it still feels white. Before her father passed away and her family fell into decline. She was also a prosperous businessman, and she was a perfect match for the Chang family. The young lady is 22 years old and is about to graduate from college. Because of his poor academic performance, he had to choose a relatively sloppy school to study. However, Yanli was still a good student in the school, conscientious in his work, and had little contact with his classmates. Her whiteness separated her from the bad things around her. Yanli has been in school for 10 years, diligently looking up new words, memorizing forms, and copying words on the blackboard. However, there always seems to be a white film between them. When she was in middle school, her classmates' brothers would write to her. People in her family would always say that it would be better for such people to avoid messing with them after reading the letters, so she never replied to the letters. Zhenbao plans to get married after she graduates in 2 months. During this period, he watched several movies with her. Yanli rarely speaks, rarely even raises his head, and always walks behind. She knew very well that according to modern rules, she should walk in front of him, let him put on her coat, and wait on her in all kinds of places. However, she could not naturally accept these rights, so she hesitated, and therefore became more dull. As for Zhenbao, he himself is quite a bit of a natural gentleman, and he learned it the hard way, so he attaches great importance to all of this and considers her to be a big flaw. Fortunately, young girls are not shy at all. The period between engagement and marriage was too short, which Yanli privately felt regretful about. As far as she knew, it should be the best period of her life. However, when the wedding day came, she was still happy. She hadn't quite woken up that morning. She was already combing her hair in a daze. She raised her arms and looked at the mirror. She felt a strange sense of effort, as if she was pretending. In the glass test tube, try to push up and take off the cover of the tube. I can't wait to jump from the present to the future. It is good now, and it will be even better in the future. She stretched her arms out of the window of the future, and the mighty wind there passed through her hair. Get married in Yupingxiang and hold the wedding banquet in Dongxing building. Zhenbao cares about face, but also pays attention to economy, as long as he can get by. He rented a new house near his official residence and brought his mother from Jiangwan to live with her. Most of the money he earns is spent on socializing and liaisons, and he is very hardworking on family expenses. Mother and Yanli got along quite well, but Zhenbao had many ulterior dissatisfaction with Yanli, because Yanli doesn't like sports. He doesn't even like the best indoor sports. Zhenbao faithfully fulfilled his duties as a husband to make her like her, but he was not very interested in her body. At first, he sometimes felt cute. Her underdeveloped breasts were like a sleeping bird in his hand, as if it had its own slightly beating heart. Its sharp beak pecked his hand, hard but soft at the same time. Yes, the soft palm is his own. Later she lost even this bit of girlish beauty. After getting used to everything, she became a very boring woman. At this time, Zhenbao began to stay in prostitution once every 3 weeks. All aspects of his life were very irregular. I went to a hotel with a few friends to book a room and called a woman. I told my family that I was going to Suzhou and Hangzhou for official business. He is not very picky about the appearance of prostitutes. He prefers those who are darker and fatter. What he wants is the humiliation of fatness. This was a kind of revenge for the former Rose and Wang Jiarui, but he himself did not want to think so. If he thought so, he immediately denounced what he thought was a profanation of the memory of the past. He left a sacred and sentimental corner in his heart for these two lovers. The Wang Jiarui in his memory became one and the same as Rose. She was an innocent and passionate girl who loved him madly. She had no brains and nothing that made him uneasy. And he, for the sake of his noble reason, the sanctions, with superhuman ironclad decision, abandoned her. Section 4 Yanli would never suspect that he was prostituted outside. She loved him, not for anything else, but because she had designated this man as hers among many others. She often said something like this: "Wait until I ask Zhen Bao, better bring an umbrella." Zhen Bao said it will rain later. He is the sky. Zhen Bao also had no doubts about it. When she did something wrong, he would scold and correct her in front of others, even if he accidentally failed to see it. His mother must have seen it. Yanli always felt that she was used to being embarrassed in front of the maid. How could she give orders again if orders don't work? It's her fault. She was afraid of seeing the contempt in the servant's eyes, so in order to defend herself, when she came into contact with the servant, she frowned and pouted before speaking, with a look of childish resentment. When she loses her temper, it always seems to be a temporary rebuttal, because she is a little girl and a concubine who is used to being low-key, only in front of the new servants. She can be the young mistress for a few days, so she would rather change servants every 3 days or 2. Zhen Bao's mother went around preaching that her daughter-in-law was useless. Poor Zhen Bao, he works hard outside to support his family. When he comes back, he has to worry about small things at home, and he can't even have a moment of peace. These words flew into Yanli's ears. A little bit of anger accumulated in my heart. That year, she gave birth to a child, and she suffered a lot during the birth. She felt she had the right to lose her temper, but her mother-in-law was unwilling to let her go. Because she was only giving birth to a daughter, so they became upset, get angry. Fortunately, Zhen Bao was able to mediate and did not make a fuss. However, his mother moved back to Jiangwan as a couple. Zhen Bao was extremely disappointed with his wife. He married her because of her submissiveness. He felt cheated. He also felt that he had been cheated on his mother. Hate for moving away so willfully. People say that he is not a good son. He was still busy and enthusiastic, but gradually he looked tired. Even the smiling wrinkles on his suit looked a little tired. After Du Bao graduated, he was promoted to work in the factory. Du Bao was overshadowed by his brother's achievements. He was not successful and had to learn to be a little prodigal. He had no other aspiration. He was not married yet and was very comfortable living in a boarding house. Early that morning, he went to Zhen Bao to discuss something. The deputy manager of the factory was going back to China. Everyone contributed gifts and sent him to buy some souvenirs. Zhen Bao taught him to go to the company and look at the silverware. The two of them came out together and took the bus. Zhen Bao sat down next to a woman. There was a child sitting on his seat. The woman casually hugged the child. Zhen Bao didn't pay attention to her, but Du Bao sat there and let out a sigh. He leaned over and nodded his head. Only then did Zhen Bao recognize that it was Jia Rui. She was fatter than before, but not as obese as he had feared at first. She was very haggard, and she was still dressed up, smeared with makeup, and wearing a gold Burmese Buddha crown bead ring on her ear. Because she is a middle-aged woman, her beauty seems gaudy. Du Bao smiled and said, "Mrs. Chu, it's been a long time." Zhen Bao remembered that he heard that she had remarried and her surname was now Zhu. Jia Rui also smiled and said, "It's been a long time." Zhen Bao nodded to her and asked, "Is this going well?" Jia Rui said, "Okay, thank you." Du Bao said, "You've been here all along, Shanghai?" Jia Rui nodded. Du Bao asked again, "Is it rare to go out so early in the morning?" Jia Rui smiled and said, "No." She put her hand on the child's shoulder and said, "Take him to the dentist. Yesterday, I had a toothache that made me very upset. I didn't sleep all night, so I have to take him there early in the morning." Du Bao said, "Where did you get off the car?" Jia Rui said, "The dentist is on the bund." "Are you going to the office?" Du Bao said, "While he goes to the office, I will go somewhere else to take a trip and buy some things." Jia Rui said, "Are the same people still in your factory?" "No big changes," Du Bao said. "Hutton is going back to China. He is here now. Let's go. Zhen Bao will be the deputy manager." Jia Rui smiled and said, "Hey, that's great." Du Bao had never said so many words in front of his brother. Zhen Bao could see it, as if he felt that in this situation, he should bear all the responsibility for the conversation. It can be seen that the matter between Jia Rui and Zhen Bao He knows it all. After one more stop, he got off the bus. Zhang Bao was silent for a while, without looking at her, and asked in the air, "How are you? How are you?" Jiarui was also silent for a while, and then said, "Very good." Still the same two sentences just now, but the meaning is completely different. Zhang Bao asked, "That person surnamed Chu. Do you love him?" Jiarui nodded, but when she answered him, she paused every 2 words and said, "It's only from you that I learned how to." What? Love? Seriously? Love is good after all. Even though it has been hard, I will still love in the future. So, Zhang Bao rolled his hands round the square lapel hanging down the back of her sensei suit, and whispered, "You're very happy." Jiarui laughed and said, "I'm just going forward. Whatever I encounter is what I encounter." Zhang Bao sneered, "What you encounter are nothing but men." Jiarui was not angry. He turned his head and thought for a while, and said, "Yes. When you are young and good-looking, no matter what you do in society, you will always meet men. But later on, besides men, there will always be men. There's always something else. There's always something else." Zhang Bao looked at her, but he didn't know at the time that the feeling in his heart was embarrassing jealousy. Jiarui asked, "What about you? How are you?" Zhang Bao wanted to sum up his perfect and happy life into simple sentences. As he was considering the words, he raised his head and looked in the small mirror protruding from the right side of the bus driver's seat. His own face looked very calm, but due to the shaking of the car, the face in the mirror also trembled unsteadily. It was a very strange and peaceful trembling, as if someone was gently massaging his face. Suddenly, his face really shook. In the mirror, he saw tears streaming down his face. He didn't know why. If anyone had to cry in a meeting like this, it should be her. This was completely wrong, yet he couldn't stop himself. She should be the one to cry and he should be the one to comfort her. She didn't comfort him. She just stayed silent for a while and said, "Are you getting off here?" He got out of the car and went to the factory to do his usual business. It was Saturday, and I had the afternoon off. At 12:30 he went home. His house was a small Western-style Shikuman alleyway house, but facing the street. It was the same for a long row, with light gray cement walls, smooth rectangular blocks like coffin boards, and wall tops. The oleander was revealed, in full bloom. Although the patio inside is small, it can be regarded as a garden, and his house has everything it should have. There are small white clouds floating in the blue sky, and flute sellers on the street are playing their flutes. The high-pitched and delicate oriental songs come out one by one like a dream painted in a novel illustration. A wisp of white air comes from the tent. When it came out, it swelled, and there were all kinds of illusions inside, like a lazy snake trying to stretch out. Later, because I was so sleepy, I finally fell asleep even in my dreams. When Zhang Bao went home, the house was quiet. His 7-year-old daughter Haiying had not finished school yet, and the maid went to pick her up from the kindergarten. Zhang Bao couldn't wait any longer, so he asked Yanli to bring the food to the table first. He ate a lot, as if he wanted to use the rice to fill the emptiness in his new home. After dinner, he called Du Bao and asked him if the gift was ready. Du Bao said he looked at several pieces of silverware, but found nothing suitable. Zhang Bao said, "I have a pair of silver vases here, which were given to us as a wedding gift. You can take them to the store and change the words on them, and I will see. You can return them to them for their part, even if it is I donated it." Du Bao said yes, and Zhang Bao said, "Then come and get it now." He was eager to see Du Bao and find out what he thought after meeting Jiarui this morning. This thing was a little unreasonable. His own reaction was so absurd that he almost suspected it was an illusion. Du Bao came, and Zhang Bao leisurely brought the topic to Jiarui. Du Bao smoked his cigarette and said in the tone of an experienced man, old, much older, as if that was the end. "Got this woman." Zhang Bao thought back to that scene with Shakai. Indeed, he felt very old. Even her old age makes him jealous of her. He looked at his wife. After 8 years of marriage, she still seemed empty and white. As if nothing had happened, she would always be like this. He asked her to wrap up a pair of silver bottles on the stove and take them to Du Bao. She hurriedly picked up a chair, took off the cushions, stood on it, took the newspaper from the top of the cupboard, and looked for a rope in the drawer. I had a rope, but it wasn't long enough. I had to wrap it up and down until it was wrapped in a mess, and the newspaper was torn. Zhen Bao looked at it bitterly, then Guo Feng walked over and snatched it away, sighing, "Everything is difficult when people are stupid." Yan Li's face flashed with the resentment of her maid and concubine. And then she smiled again, smiling to herself. Then she looked to see if Du Bao was funny, fearing that he might not understand her husband's joke. She stood with her arms folded and watched Zhen Bao bandaging the silver vase. A white film seemed to be covering her face, and her face was strangely blurred. Du Bao couldn't sit still. Few relatives and friends who came to their home could sit still, so he wanted to leave. Yan Li tried her best to make up for her mistake, cheered up and persuaded him to stay with him affectionately. "If you have nothing to do, just sit there for a while." She narrowed her eyes and smiled, wrinkled the bridge of her nose slightly, and was quite flattering. She often gave people such sudden affection. If Du Bao was a woman, she would hold his hand, with a damp palm, desperately holding on to it, an unpleasant intimacy. Du Bao still wanted to leave, and when he walked to the door, he happened to meet the old woman leading Haiying back. Du Bao took out the chewing gum from his pants and gave it to Haiying. Yan Li smiled and said, "Thank you, uncle. Say thank you." Haiying turned away, turning away. Du Bao said with a smile, "Hey, it's so embarrassing." Haiying pulled up the silk skirt of her dress to cover her face, revealing the shorts underneath. Yan Li hurriedly said, Hey, this is so embarrassing." Haiying, after taking the candy, he still covered his head with his skirt and ran out laughing all the way. Zhen Bao sat from a distance and looked at his daughter's dancing little yellow arms and legs. There was no such child in the first place, but he called her out of the void. Zhen Bao went upstairs to wipe his face, while Yan Li turned on the radio downstairs to listen to the news report. Zhen Bao thought this was beneficial and a kind of education for modern housewives. It would be good to learn a few sentences in Mandarin. He didn't know that Yan Li listened to the radio, but he was willing to hear human voices. Zhen Bao looked out of the window. He saw blue sky and white clouds. Oleanders were blooming in the courtyard, and the flute on the street was still playing, with a shrill and twisted voice like that of a lowly woman. The flute is not good. The sound is a bit broken and slightly harsh. It was a beautiful spring afternoon. Zhen Bao looked at the world he had made with his hands, and there was no way he could destroy it. The quiet building was filled with sunshine. There was a man talking on the radio downstairs, and he kept talking without ending. Ever since Zhen Bao got married, he always felt that everyone in the outside world, starting from his mother, should pat him on the shoulder and reward him. Like his mother, who knew the details of his sacrifice, even those who didn't know the details, he felt that they owed him some respect and some tender compensation. People often praise him for this, but he always feels it is not enough, so he works very hard to do extra good things. And this kind of people always stick to him without waiting for others to solicit him. He paid off several debts for his brother Du Bao, got him married, and helped him settle down and support his family. In addition, he has a troubled sister. For her sake, he is particularly enthusiastic about taking care of his single or widowed friends, helping them find jobs, raising money, and doing everything possible. Later, he went through a lot of trouble and introduced his sister to teach in a school in the mainland because he heard that the male teachers there were all recent college graduates and not yet married. But his sister couldn't bear the pain. Before the 6-month contract was completed, she lost her temper and returned to Shanghai. Afterwards, his mother felt sorry for her daughter and blamed Zhen Bao for being too reckless. Yan Li looked on, feeling really angry and complaining about everyone he met. However, Yan Li rarely had the chance to meet people. Because Zhen Bao didn't have a lively and generous housewife at home, he would rather spend an extra 2 yuan to entertain guests outside and never bring friends home. It was rare for a friend to come to see him, and it happened that Zhen Bao was not around. Yan Li always treated people with care and treated them as his own. When talking about Zhen Bao, he said, "Zhen Bao suffers from this. He treats others with sincerity, and he suffers." "Oh, Mr. Zhang, don't you think so?" This world doesn't work now. Even his own younger brothers and sisters are so ungrateful. Let alone friends. They will come to you when they have something to ask for. None of them are like this. I seeing too much. Zhen Bao always suffers losses every time, but he is still stubborn. In today's world, good people can't do anything. Mr. Zhang, don't you think so? My friend felt that he would soon be included in the ungrateful group. My heart became cold first. None of Zhen Bao's friends liked Yanli, even though she was the most ideal friend's wife, beautiful and demure, and could serve as the background for the men's high-pitched discussions. Yanli doesn't have a girlfriend herself, because she doesn't feel that her status in the family is low because she doesn't compare with others. Zhen Bao also did not encourage her to associate with ordinary ladies. He was considerate of her inability to do that, and put her in a relatively unfamiliar situation, which would in vain expose her shortcomings and cause a lot of trouble. She told people how he had suffered a lot, and he had forgiven her. Women are always narrow-minded, and she was just protecting him and not letting him suffer any injustice. But later she also said such words to the old woman, and he couldn't help but lose his temper and interfere. Another time, he heard her complaining to 8-year-old Haing, but he remained silent and soon sent Haing to live in school. Then the house became even quieter. Yanli suffers from constipation and sits in the bathroom for several hours every day. Only at that time can she legitimately not do anything. Talk or think. The rest of the time she doesn't talk or think, but there is always something in her heart uneasy. Walking around without finding a place, only in the white bathroom did she settle down and take root. She looked down at her snow-white belly. The white patch sometimes bulged out, sometimes deflated, and the shape of her belly button also changed. Sometimes it looked like the eyes of a sweet and expressionless Greek stone statue. Sometimes it looked like a protruding glare, and sometimes it looked like a prominent glare. They are the eyes of a cold god and Buddha. There is a sinister smile in the eyes, but they are very cute. The corners of the eyes are curved and there are crow's feet. Zhen Bao took Yanli to see a doctor and bought medicine for her according to the advertisement in the newspaper. Later, he felt that she was not very enthusiastic, as if she was willing to keep the disease for self-respect. He didn't care. One time, he was treating Huang Mishan to lunch on behalf of the factory. It started to rain before he left the office. He hired a car to go home to get a raincoat. On the way, he couldn't help but think back to the past, when he lived at Jiarui's house. It rained 2 o'clock that day and the weather changed. He rushed back to get his coat. That was a memorable day. I got off the car and walked into the door, always surrounded by the faint sadness of memories. When I went in, I saw that the raincoat was not on the hanger. His heart skipped a beat, as if what happened 10 years ago came to life again. He walked toward the guest room, his heart still pounding, and he felt a strange sense of destiny. He pressed his hand on the door button of the living room and opened the door. Yanli was in the living room, and there was a tailor standing at the other end of the sofa. Everything was familiar. Zhen Bao put his mind down, but somehow he suddenly picked it up again. He felt nervous for no other reason than that the other 2 people in the room were nervous. Yanli asked, "Are you eating at home?" Zhen Bao said, "No, I just came back to get a raincoat." He looked at the tailor's baggage placed on the chair. There was no sign of moisture. It had already rained. It's been more than an hour. The tailor had no galoshes on his feet either. The tailor looked at him and seemed to be in a daze. He walked over and took out a ruler from the bundle to measure Yanli's size. Yanli made a weak gesture to Zhen Bao and said, "The raincoat is hanging in the kitchen all to dry in the shade." She looked like she was about to push away the tailor to get the raincoat, but she didn't move after all, standing there for him to measure. Zhen Bao knew very well that after having sex with a woman, his expression would be completely different if he touched her body in front of others, which was extremely obvious. Zhen Bao looked at them both coldly. Yu's big white lips were pressed tightly against the glass window, puffing out air. It was cold and confused outside, but it was tightly closed inside. It felt so friendly that there were 3 people like this in the room. Zhen Bao himself was aloof, watching this pair of inexperienced adulterers and adulterers. He no longer understood. How can I be with such a person? Although this tailor was young, he was already a bit stooped. His face was sallow, and there were a few scabs on the back of his head. He looked like just a tailor. Zhenbao went to get his raincoat and put it on, buttoning the buttons all the way. When he returned to the living room, the tailor was no longer there. Zhenbao said to Yanli, "I may be back later. You don't have to wait for me for dinner." Yanli came forward and agreed. He seemed to be a little flustered. He had nothing to do with his hands and was eager to do something. Turned on the radio. It was time for the Mandarin news report again, and another man's voice filled the room. Zhenbao felt that there was no need to speak anymore, so he turned around and went out, buttoning all the way. I don't know why there are so many buttons. The door of the living room was wide open, and the upright and clear-minded man could be heard talking on the radio. He was right. Zhenbao thought, I treat her well. I don't love her, but I have nothing to do with her. I can't be considered bad in my treatment of her. She's a bastard. She probably knows she's not good enough and must find someone better than her, despicable, to comfort herself. But I treat her so well. Yanli in the room was probably still feeling uneasy, so he turned off the radio with a snap. Zhenbao stood in the doorway, feeling choked for a moment. If the listener turned off the radio and the person talking on the radio could know, it would be the same feeling. A sudden blockage, a suffocating emptiness. He stood on the edge of the steps, facing the street on a rainy day, and stood there for a while. A rickshaw came over to do business, and he got on the rickshaw and drove away without negotiating the price. When he came back in the evening, there was a foot of water on the steps. The home in the dark water seemed to have changed greatly. He looked at it and thought it was suitable. But when I walked in, I smelled the tight and warm smell, and the yellow electric light illuminated all the way up the stairs. Home was still home. There was no difference. He took off his soaked shoes and socks at the door and handed them to the maid. He went upstairs to the bedroom with bare feet and reached out to touch the light switch. There was a light on in the bathroom, and looking in through the half-open door, the pale yellow and white bathroom looked like a long and narrow shaft. The aureole under the lamp is also light yellow and white in color. Of course, the paintings of beautiful women in the past have never adopted such an embarrassing subject matter. She is holding up her pants, bending over, and is about to stand up. Her hair is hanging straight down from her face. She has changed into pajamas with white flowers, and her short shirt is held high. Half of it was pressed under the chin, and the pajamas were bloated on the feet, revealing a long body like a white silkworm in the middle. If it were in the United States, it might be possible to make a good papyrus advertisement. But Zhenbao took a quick glance and felt that there was a kind of filth in the home, like the feeling of hair in the burrows on a rainy day. It was wet and exuded a depressed popularity. He turned on the light in the bedroom. When Yanli saw that he was back, he quickly asked, "Are your feet wet?" Zhenbao responded and said, "I have to wash my feet right away." Yanli said, "I'll be out soon. I asked Mama Yu to boil the water." Zhenbao said, "She is burning." Yanli washed his hands and came out, and Mama Yu also brought the kettle. Zhenbao sneezed, and Yu's mother said, "You've caught a cold. Do you need to close the door?" Zhenbao closed the door and was alone in the bathroom. The rain was falling heavily, and it hit the glass window. There is a pot of unknown flowers in the bathtub. They are in full bloom and are delicate yellow. Although they have not been exposed to the rain, they seem to feel the rain. The footbath is placed next to the flower pot. Zhenbao is sitting on the edge of the bathtub, bent over. I washed my feet and was careful not to splash the hot water on the flowers. When I lowered my head, I could smell a little fragrance either intentionally or unintentionally. He put one leg on his knee and wiped each toe dry with a towel, suddenly feeling pampered for himself. He looked at his own flesh, not as if he were looking at it, but as if he were a lover other than himself. He was deeply saddened, feeling that he had wasted him in vain. He took off his slippers and stood at the window to look out. The rain has lightened up a lot and gradually stopped. The street became a river, and a street lamp was reflected in the water waves, like a series of white gold arrowheads that disappeared after being shot. Vehicles passed by, rolling, dragging white waves, unfolding like a peacock's screen, covering up the shadow of the street lamp. Venus gradually appeared in the white peacock's screen, and the peacock's tail grew longer and faded. The car passed by, but the white gold arrowhead was still left. It was gone when it was shot out on the dark yellow river. It was gone after being shot out. Zhen Bao put his hand against the glass window and clearly felt that his hand and his breathing were deeply sad. He remembered that there was a bottle of brandy in the cupboard. Took it out, filled a glass, and stood facing outside the window to sip slowly. Yanli walked up behind him and said, "You should drink a sip of brandy to warm your stomach. Otherwise you won't really catch a cold." The heat of the brandy rushed straight to his face, and he turned into blazing eyes and turned around to look at her with hatred. He hated that kind of solicitousness, especially the fact that she seemed to be watching from behind to see how much he knew. In the next 2 weeks, Yanli kept watching him, probably thinking that there was nothing wrong with him and that he was not suspicious. So she felt relieved and gradually forgot that she had anything to hide. Even Zhen Bao became suspicious, as if she had no secrets at all. Like two closed white doors, with lamps dimly lit on both sides, in the wilderness night. Banging on the door desperately, it is concluded that a murder has occurred behind the door. However, when I opened the door and walked in, there was no murder, not even a house. I only saw a patch of wild smoke and vines under the stars. It was really scary. Zhen Bao now often drinks and plays with women openly outside. Unlike before, he still has many scruples. He would come home drunk, or he would not come back at all. Yanli always has her own explanation, saying that he has added many new social activities that she cannot refuse. She would never admit it had anything to do with her, she stubbornly explained to herself. Later, when his dissoluteness gradually became obvious to the point where it could no longer be hidden from others, she explained it to others again, smiling and loyally covering it up for him. Therefore, even though Zhen Bao was making trouble outside and had to bring prostitutes home, everyone still saw him as an upright and good person. It rained continuously for a month. One day, the old woman said that her silk shirt had shrunk in the wash and she needed to put down the welt. Zhen Bao sat on the bed and put on his socks. He said casually, "Let the tailor take it and put it away for a while." "Mother, you said, the tailor hasn't been here for a long time. I wonder if he has gone to the countryside." Zhen Bao thought to himself, "Oh, is it so easy to break off? There is no emotion at all. How dirty?" He asked again. "What? Didn't you come to collect the bill during the Dragon Boat Festival?" Yuma said. "It's the little apprentice." This Yu's mother had been staying at his house for 3 years. She folded her gown and put it on the edge of the bed and patted it gently. Although she didn't look at him, the gentle and old smile on her face was a little comforting. Zhen Bao became angry. That afternoon he took a woman out to play and deliberately brought her to his house to get money. The woman was waiting for him on a tricycle. It's a sunny day, the water in the street has not receded, and there are shadows of sycamore trees in the yellow river. Across the street, there are small red houses, green trees with a green glow, and wet yellow smoke rising from the chimneys, flying low. Zhen Bao took out the money and threw his umbrella on the water, splashing water all over the woman. The woman screamed, and he stepped onto the tricycle and laughed, feeling a kind of muddled happiness. Looking up at the window upstairs, I saw an oriole standing in the window looking out. It looked like an old silk saucer with yellow stains on the wall in the bathroom, or a shallow white plate with stains on the heart. A circle of tea stains. Zhen Bao hit the umbrella toward the water again, smashing it. Break! I couldn't smash the home he built, his wife, and his daughter, but at least he could smash himself. The umbrella hit the water, and the cold mud flew into his face. He felt so cherished like a lover, but at the same time, there was another strong-willed self standing opposite his lover, pulling and pulling with her, struggling. "I have to smash him. I have to smash him." Tricycle was driving in the waves, and the water splashed onto the leather shoes, wallet, and clothes of the woman next to her. She clamored for compensation from him. Zhen Bao smiled, put an arm around her, and went to splash water again. After that, even Yanli couldn't defend him. Zhen Bao didn't take any money back to support his family. His daughter had no tuition fees for school, and daily groceries were a problem. Yanli turned into a brave little woman at this time. She was almost 30 years old. She suddenly grew up and spoke fluently. She cried to people, "What's wrong with this? It's really true. It's going to kill me. A whole family depends on him. And if he goes to the factory like this, he will lose everything. He is crazy, or he won't come back. And when he comes back, he will beat people and smash things. He is not such a person. Mr. Liu, think about it for me. Think about it for me. How am I going to live my life?" Yanli now suddenly has self-esteem, social status, sympathy and friendship. One night when Zhen Bao came home, she sat in the living room and talked to Du Bao. Of course she was talking about him, but she stopped talking when she saw him. She was dressed in all black, and under the light there were some wrinkles on her sad face, but she still had a calm beauty. Zhen Bao did not slap the stage, but walked in, exchanged greetings with Du Bao, lit a cigarette, sat down calmly and talked about the current situation and stocks for a while. Then said he was tired and wanted to go to bed early, and went upstairs alone. Yanli simply didn't understand what was going on, as if she had just lied and it was difficult to explain. After Du Bao left, Zhen Bao heard Yanli coming into the room. As soon as he stepped into the door, he swept the lamp and hot water bottle on the small cabinet to the floor, and it shattered into pieces. He bent down and picked up the iron base of the desk lamp and threw it at her with the wire attached. She quickly turned around and fled. Zhen Bao felt that she was completely defeated and was so proud that he stood there smiling silently. The quiet laughter flowed out of his eyes and ran down his face like tears. The old woman stood at the door with a broom and dustpan in her hands, and Zhen Bao closed the door, so she didn't dare to come near. Zhen Bao fell asleep on the bed until he was bitten by a mosquito in the middle of the night and woke up. He got up and turned on the light. Lying in the middle of the floor was Yanli's pair of embroidered shoes, slightly splayed, one in front and one in back. As if a ghost that dared not reveal itself came timidly towards him, pleading. Zhen Bao sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long time. When he lay down again, he sighed, feeling the air of his old kindness sneaking closer and surrounding him little by little. Countless worries and responsibilities buzzed around him together with the mosquitoes, biting and sucking him. When he got up the next day, Zhen Bao changed his ways and became a good person again.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.